You're fired. Get out. Why did this driver risk his job to hide the truth? Being late was the least of his problems. When his boss dug deeper, they uncovered a secret so wild that it shattered trust instantly. Was it fraud? A double life? Or something even darker? This isn't just about punctuality. It's about deception on another level. Wait until you hear what he was doing instead of showing up on time. The words hit Frank like a physical blow. His hands, still damp from the morning rain, clenched at his sides as he stood in the lavish office of Emmanuel Bello, one of Nigeria's wealthiest businessmen. The air smelled of expensive leather and bitter coffee, but all Frank could taste was shame. "Sir, please," Frank pleaded, his voice rough with exhaustion. "If you would just let me explain." "I don't pay you to explain. I pay you to be on time," Emmanuel snapped, adjusting his cufflinks as he glared at Frank from behind his polished mahogany desk. Behind him, floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the storm still raging outside, a cruel mirror to the tempest in Frank's chest. Frank swallowed hard. He had worked for Emmanuel for 12 years. Never late, never a complaint. But today of all days. "You were supposed to be here at 6:30 a.m. sharp," Emmanuel continued, his tone icy. "My board meeting started at 7. Because of you, I will look like a fool in front of my partners." Frank's throat tightened. He had driven through flooded streets, his heart pounding as he carried his unconscious wife into the emergency room. The hospital clock had read 6:27 a.m. when he finally sprinted back to his car. He'd driven like a madman, but the storm had stolen every minute. "Sir, my wife, I don't care about excuses." Emmanuel slammed a fist on the desk. "Hand over your keys and leave, now." Frank's hands trembled as he placed the company car keys on the desk. The other drivers in the hallway avoided his eyes as he walked out. His uniform soaked, his pride in tatters. But someone was watching. A young intern, Daniel, pulled out his phone and started recording as Frank stumbled into the rain, his shoulders shaking. Why was a man who was never late suddenly risking his job? Daniel's thumb hovered over the upload button. Little did he know. That video would change everything. Frank's hands shook as he stepped out of the towering glass building, the rain mixing with the hot tears on his face. He barely noticed the honking cars or the stares from pedestrians as he trudged toward the bus stop. His mind was still replaying Emmanuel's words. "You're fired. Get out." Meanwhile, inside the office, Daniel, the young intern, stared at his phone screen. The video he had just recorded showed Frank's broken expression. The way his shoulders slumped as if carrying an invisible weight. Something didn't add up. Frank had been the most punctual driver in the company. Why would he suddenly be late today? Curiosity gnawed at Daniel. He opened his social media app and typed a caption. "This man just got fired for being late. But I think there's more to the story. Does anyone recognize him?" He hesitated for only a second before hitting post. By noon, the video had 5,000 shares. By 3 p.m., it was trending, and by evening, the internet exploded. A nurse from St. Mary's Hospital commented, "Oh my God, that's the man who carried his wife into emergency this morning. She had a seizure. He was crying the whole time." A screenshot followed, security footage of Frank, drenched and frantic, cradling a woman in his arms as he rushed through the hospital doors. The timestamp 6:27 a.m., the exact time he was supposed to be at work. Twitter erupted. He chose his wife over his job and got fired for it? This is heartbreaking. Who's the monster that fired him? Someone should find this man. We need to help him. The hashtag 27 minutes late began spreading like wildfire. Emmanuel Bello, oblivious to the storm brewing online, sat in his penthouse, swirling a glass of whiskey. His phone buzzed, a call from his PR manager. "Sir, we have a problem. What now?" Emmanuel sighed. "You need to check Twitter, now." Emmanuel is about to discover the world knows what he did. And they're furious. Emmanuel's blood ran cold as he scrolled through Twitter, his heart racing with each new notification. His face was already splayed across numerous tweets. The headline screaming, "This is the CEO who fired a dedicated employee for saving his wife's life." The images juxtaposed his polished corporate headshot, confident and detached as courage, against a heart-wrenching picture of Frank, his longtime driver, carrying his gravely ill wife, Grace, to the hospital. The phone in his hand buzzed insistently, cutting through his rising panic. It was his sister, Lydia, and she wasted no time with pleasantries. "Emmanuel, what the hell did you do?" she snapped, her voice cracking with anger and disbelief. "I didn't know," he protested, but the conviction in his voice faltered under the weight of his own guilt. "You didn't even ask, did you?" she shot back, her tone sharp and unyielding. "You never do. You just jump to conclusions, assuming the worst about people." Her words hit him like a ton of bricks. He thought of Frank, the man who had navigated the chaotic streets to get him to countless meetings over the last decade. A reliable worker who never complained, even when the traffic turned maddening or the weather turned foul. Until today, when everything had spiraled into a nightmare, he still couldn't fully grasp. Another notification flashed across his screen. A live news segment. Breaking, the identity of the fired driver has been confirmed as Frank Okafor, 58. His wife Grace is currently in critical condition following a tragic incident. A crowdfunding campaign for her medical expenses has already raised 8 million yen in just 3 hours. Emmanuel's stomach twisted in a painful knot. He had carelessly terminated a man from making a choice between his job and the life of his dying wife. How had he allowed such a catastrophic misunderstanding to occur? The weight of his decision pressed heavily on his chest, suffocating in its intensity. With a sense of urgency swelling within him, he grabbed his coat. The fabric was heavy as it fell around his shoulders. "Where are you going?" Lydia asked, concern lacing her voice in stark contrast to her earlier fury. "To fix this," he responded. Determination seeped into his tone, even as doubt crept into the back of his mind. He had to make this right. For Frank. For Grace. And for the countless mistakes he had made along the way. The hospital hallway stretched endlessly before Emmanuel, the sterile white walls amplifying the pounding of his heart. Reporters had already gathered outside, but he had slipped in through a service entrance. Not out of cowardice, but because this wasn't about publicity. This was personal. He paused outside room 307, his hand hovering over the door. A muffled sob leaked through the gap. Strengthening himself, he knocked. The door opened to reveal Frank, his eyes red-rimmed, his usual crisp driver's uniform replaced by rumpled clothes. For a long moment, the two men just stared at each other. "Sir?" Frank's voice was hoarse. Emmanuel swallowed hard. I came to see your wife." Frank's jaw tightened, but he stepped aside. The room was dim, the rhythmic beeping of machines the only sound. Grace Okafor lay motionless on the bed, her face pale, an oxygen tube snaking from her nose. A young boy, Frank's son Daniel, clung to her hand, his small frame shaking with silent tears. Emmanuel's throat closed up. This was why Frank had been late. This was what he'd chosen over his job. "I didn't know," Emmanuel whispered. Frank's laugh was bitter. "You didn't ask." The words mirrored Lydia's earlier accusation, cutting deeper than any reprimand. Emmanuel's hands clenched at his sides. "I'm sorry," he said, the words foreign on his tongue. "For everything." Frank turned away, his shoulders hunched. "Sorry won't pay her medical bills. Sorry won't feed my son." A notification chimed on Daniel's phone. He glanced at it, then gasped, "Dad? Look." Frank took the phone, his eyes widening. The crowdfunding campaign had just hit 15 million. Emmanuel cleared his throat. That's good, but it's not enough." He pulled an envelope from his coat. "This is for Grace's treatment, and your job, your real job, is waiting for you as head of my private security logistics." Frank's head snapped up. "What?" "No more driving," Emmanuel said firmly. "You'll oversee my entire team. Double salary, full benefits." For the first time that day, Frank looked at him, really looked at him. Not as his employer, but as a man. Why? Frank asked quietly. Emmanuel's gaze drifted to Grace, to the boy clinging to her hand. Because today I learned what real priorities look like. The press conference was set for noon, but by 11 a.m., the crowd outside Bellow Industries had swelled to hundreds. Protesters held signs, unfair dismissal, family over profits, while news vans lined the street. Inside, Emmanuel adjusted his tie in the mirror, his reflection pale. Lydia handed him a note card. "Stick to this," she said. "No corporate jargon, just human words." He nodded, his palms sweating. When he stepped onto the podium, the roar of the crowd was deafening. Cameras flashed like lightning. Emmanuel took a deep breath and did something he'd never done before. He stepped away from the microphone, down to the pavement, eye level with the people. "I owe you all the truth," he began, his voice carrying in the sudden hush. "2 days ago, I fired a good man for being 27 minutes late. I didn't ask why. I didn't care why. That was my failure." He turned to where Frank stood at the edge of the crowd, his son clutching his hand. Frank Okafor wasn't late because he was lazy. He was late because he was saving his wife's life. A murmur rippled through the crowd, and instead of thanking him for his loyalty, I threw him away like he was nothing. Emmanuel's voice broke. "Frank, I can't undo what I did, but I can do better." He gestured to the building behind him. "Starting today, Bellow Industries will implement a family-first policy, paid emergency leave, flexible hours for caregivers, and a fund for employees in crisis." The crowd erupted in applause, but Emmanuel only had eyes for Frank. The older man's expression was unreadable. Then slowly, Frank nodded. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. The reporters surged forward like a tidal wave, their fervor palpable as microphones were thrust into Frank's face, a cacophony of questions rising above the din. Camera flashes punctuated the dim evening air, illuminating the deep lines of exhaustion etched around his eyes. Remnants of countless sleepless nights and burdens too heavy to bear. "Mr. Okafor, will you really return to work for the man who fired you?" A voice shouted from the front, brimming with urgency and disbelief. Frank's gaze dropped to his son, Daniel. The boy's small hand clutched his with a fierce grip, a lifeline in the storm of chaos. Frank felt a surge of protectiveness, willing himself to be strong. He then turned to Emmanuel, who stood at the podium, his carefully prepared speech forgotten, his face a mix of anticipation and dread. The atmosphere grew tense as the crowd held its collective breath, expecting a monumental decision. "I'll come back," Frank said, his voice steady in the face of the storm, even as a slight tremor betrayed the tension in his hands. But not without conditions. A murmur rippled through the audience, a mix of shock and intrigue. Emmanuel stepped forward, his expression earnest, nodding vigorously. "Anything you say, Frank." Frank raised 3 fingers, drawing everyone's attention with each point he made. "First, the family-first policy needs to apply to every employee, drivers, cleaners, security. Everyone deserves to know their families come first." "Done," Emmanuel replied without a moment's hesitation, eager to regain Frank's trust. "Second," Frank continued, his tone resolute, "you will visit St. Mary's Children's Ward once a month. Not for the cameras, not for show, but for the children who need it." Emmanuel's color drained slightly as the weight of the suggestion settled over him. "I'll do it," he muttered, though the notion clearly unsettled him. "And third," Frank's voice lowered, laden with emotion, "you need to apologize to my wife, not to me, to her." An aching silence enveloped the gathered crowd, amplifying the gravity of Frank's final demand. Emmanuel swallowed hard, his throat dry as he contemplated the request. When can I see her?" Frank's gaze remained steady, unyielding. Now. The finality of his words hung in the air, unmistakable. This was not just a negotiation, it was a reclamation of dignity, a stand for family, and an assertion that true accountability would not be taken lightly. Grace's hospital room was filled with the sterile scent of antiseptic, mingled with the faint, sorrowful fragrance of wilted flowers, resting in a vase by the window. The rhythmic beeping of the cardiac monitor created a slow, steady heartbeat, echoed by the tension in the air as Emmanuel lingered hesitantly in the doorway, the fluorescent lights casting a harsh glow on his polished leather shoes. He felt suddenly out of place, unsure of how to bridge the gap between past actions and the present moment. Frank, standing beside him, nudged him gently forward. "She's awake," he whispered, a hint of encouragement in his voice. Grace turned her head slightly, her dark eyes striking and penetrating even against the paleness of her skin, which carried evidence of her recent struggles. For a fleeting moment, recognition flickered across her features, but it was swiftly replaced by something colder, something that could carve ice. "So," she rasped, her voice hoarse from the breathing tube, "you're the man who nearly made my husband choose between me and his job." There was an edge to her words, sharp and unforgiving, that cut through the sterile air. Emmanuel felt his heart drop as he focused intently on his shoes, their glossy surface suddenly the most intriguing thing in the room. "Mrs. Okafor, he began, desperate to make sense of his own failings. "Thank you for the apology. You're apologizing for nearly killing me," Grace interrupted, her voice fierce despite her weakness. The heart monitor responded to the intensity of her emotions, spiking with agitation. Frank instinctively moved closer to her side, concerned for her well-being. But Grace waved him off, her unwavering gaze pinned on Emmanuel, demanding his full attention. "I was wrong," Emmanuel admitted, each word choking him like the medical equipment surrounding them. "I thought I was running a business, but instead I was just being cruel." The weight of realization settled heavily in the air, suffocating him. Grace held his gaze for what felt like an eternity. Her expression was unreadable. Then she sighed, a sound that echoed resignation. "Sit down, Mr. Hotshot CEO. You're blocking my view of the window." As Emmanuel sank into the visitor's chair, his posture slumped and defeated. Grace sought Frank's hand, her grip tight and reassuring. "This man," she stated tersely while nodding at Emmanuel, "is going to pay for Daniel's school fees, all the way through university." Her voice was firm, unyielding, as if it were a decree. It wasn't a question. It was an ultimatum. Emmanuel nodded frantically, his heart racing. "Of course, and your medical bills too," and he stumbled over his words, eager to correct his previous missteps. Grace's smile was thin and razor-like, cutting through the tension. "Good. Now you guys can leave. My soap opera starts in 5 minutes." Her tone was final, dismissive, as she turned her gaze towards the window, leaving Emmanuel to grapple with the gravity of her words and the wreckage of his decisions. The boardroom was in a state of turmoil, a cacophony of angry voices and heated exchanges. "You're gutting our profits," shouted Mr. Adebayo, his frustration evident as he slammed his fist down on the polished conference table, rattling the coffee cups. The overhead screens displayed stock charts that painted a grim picture, each line a reminder of the company's downward spiral since the scandal broke. At the head of the table, Emmanuel held his ground, the words of his friend Frank echoing in his mind, a guiding mantra. "You visit St. Mary's Children's Ward once a month. Not for cameras, for them." "Gentlemen," Emmanuel began, his voice steady yet soft, cutting through the chaos. "We're not just cutting costs, we're in the process of rebuilding our soul." With a deft swipe on his tablet, he transformed the screen, from dismal financial reports to something far more poignant. New images filled the room. Photos of St. Mary's Pediatric Ward, stark and heartbreaking. Gaunt-faced children connected to IV drips, their hopeful eyes reflecting both fear and resilience. Overworked nurses hustling to meet the needs of their tiny patients, and walls that wore a coat of peeling paint, each flake telling a story of neglect. My director of logistics, has been taking these kids to their chemotherapy appointments for years, Emmanuel continued, his heart heavy with the weight of their struggle, all on his own time and in his own car. The boardroom felt eerily silent as the gravity of his words sank in. "So here's the new plan," Emmanuel declared, his tone firm yet passionate. "We will allocate 15% of our quarterly profits to St. Mary's, ensuring these children receive the care they desperately need. We'll provide company vans to transport them for medical visits. And," he paused, drawing in a deep breath, steeling himself for the reactions to come, "I'll be driving the first route myself this Saturday." A storm of uproar erupted immediately, heads shaking in disbelief, voices raised in protest. "You can't be serious," one board member exclaimed, disbelief painting his features. "This is corporate suicide," another added, his tone a mix of outrage and fear for their financial future. Emmanuel waited patiently, allowing the din of discontent to build, before he dropped the final bombshell, his voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. "Oh, and effective immediately? I'm taking a 50% pay cut. The savings will be directed toward funding scholarships for our employees' children." As shock registered across the faces in the room, Emmanuel stood firm, and then walked out of the boardroom, straight into Frank, who had been listening at the door, his expression a mix of admiration and gratitude. Frank handed him a set of car keys, a knowing smile on his face. "Better practice your driving, Olga. Those kids deserve someone who knows how to avoid potholes." For the first time in years, a genuine laugh escaped Emmanuel's lips, breaking the heavy tension that had blanketed the room. It was a moment of light amidst the storm, a reminder of hope and purpose in the heart of adversity. The orphanage director's office was a cramped space, barely larger than a closet, but Mrs. Ndozi Coker filled it with a palpable fury that seemed to press down on everything around her. The walls, adorned with fading posters of children smiling and playing, felt more like a prison than a sanctuary. "You," she spat, her voice sharp as a knife, jabbing an accusatory finger at Emmanuel's chest, "are banned from this facility." The words hung heavy in the air, echoing against the bare walls, leaving no room for misunderstanding. Behind him, little Adana, her frail form tied to an IV pole, fidgeted nervously, her eyes darting between Emmanuel and Mrs. Coker. Incomprehension was written across her young face. The other children watched from doorways, their hopeful expressions crumbling into disappointment, their small shoulders slumping in unison. Emmanuel forced himself to draw in a deep breath, trying to steady the turmoil within him. "Mrs. Coker, I understand your distrust," he began, his voice steady but punctuated with an edge of desperation. "You understand nothing," she shot back. Her anger was palpable. She yanked open a filing cabinet, the old wood creaking in protest as she rifled through its contents. Finally, she pulled out a yellowed newspaper clipping. Its edges are weak and frayed. The headline screamed, "Bellow Industries shutters local factory, 200 jobs lost." The date was 5 years ago. And the location? This very neighborhood, where families like hers had once thrived. "My husband worked at that factory," Mrs. Coker hissed, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and sorrow. "He took his own life 3 months after you outsourced his job to China, all in the name of profit." The air left Emmanuel's lungs in a rush, a sinking sensation in his stomach as he grappled with the weight of her accusation. He remembered that decision all too clearly, the cold numbers on a spreadsheet that had haunted him since that day. His father's voice echoed in his mind, "Business isn't personal, son." Just then, Frank appeared in the doorway, drawn by the commotion. His eyes flicked from the devastating clipping in Mrs. Coker's grasp to Emmanuel's ashen face, sensing the gravity of the moment. Without a word, Frank knelt beside Adana, his demeanor transforming into gentle reassurance. "Come, let's get you to your appointment," he murmured, his voice soothing as he guided her past the charged atmosphere. A whisper of calm amidst the storm. Emmanuel finally found his voice, raw and earnest. "Mrs. Coker, there's no apology big enough for the pain my decisions have caused. But please, allow me to drive these children, not as an act of charity, as penance." She studied him for a long, tense moment, her expression a mix of skepticism and vulnerability. Finally, she spoke, her voice a low murmur that sliced through the tension. "Prove it. Reopen the factory." The challenge hung between them. A flicker of hope. 1 year later, the hashtag 27 minutes late trended again, but this time it resonated with a profoundly different sentiment. At the recently reopened factory, now thriving with renewed purpose, as it produced affordable medical equipment, workers erupted in cheers as they streamed the video of Emmanuel on their phones, contagious smiles spreading across their faces. The atmosphere was electric, infused with a sense of collective pride. Mrs. Coker, their mentor and guiding light, allowed herself a rare smile as she witnessed the transformation. In the hospital cafeteria, laughter filled the air when Grace Okafor elbowed Frank, nudging him playfully as they watched the news coverage. "See what you started?" she said. Her eyes were sparkling with mischief and admiration. Frank shook his head in disbelief, pride swelling in his chest, though his eyes were suspiciously bright with unshed tears. The memory of his own experience flooded back, a painful reminder of how a moment could change everything. In that moment, it became clear. Some lessons can't be captured in boardroom meetings or financial reports. They arrived 27 minutes late, often drenched in rain and laden with the weight of what truly matters: compassion, courage, and the profound connections that define our humanity.